I am so excited to welcome Dr. Lawrence Bryant to The Reckoning. Dr. Bryant, how are you?
I'm doing absolutely exquisite. I'm on this side of the earth. I'm grateful for life, and I'm living my best and authentic life.
Uh, that is, that in itself can be an entire list of topics that we can talk through. And I do want to explore that a little bit. Thank you for saying that. Um, what are you at this point right now, today, most proud of um, that you've accomplished so far?
I actually have done the internal work for many, many years to live a life as an elder, Black, gay man who lives his life unapologetically, who lives his life transparently, and who lives his life expecting, even though I have more years behind me than I do in front of me, I still feel like the best is yet to come. So the freedom of living one's authentic life is just like nothing that I've ever experienced before. And having said that, through the years, being in recovery for 32 years from mind and mood altering chemicals, to be able to take the pain along with the glory of one's life and transition that into a platform to help others that may be going through what I've already been through. There's just a freedom in that. And even more importantly, a freedom in just knowing that you are living in your life's purpose is just something that I am just so grateful for.
Mm, thank you so much for that word. And I am excited to talk with you a bit about your journey. We are going to cover a lot of things in our conversation because you are living a very rich life, right? And one of the things that I became aware of about you, we were actually at the Saving Ourselves Symposium. You came to the session that our executive director, Charles and Emery, hosted. And you had talked briefly, just kind of mentioned a piece of your story around Los Angeles, right? And I want to start there because I went to Los Angeles for the first time last year, and there is a magnetism about that city, but I also know that it has a rich Black gay history. And I just want to start there to talk about what landed you in LA? How did you get there?
Fantastic question. Firstly, I'm from Philadelphia, born, bred, and raised in the city of brotherly love, the city of Patti Bell, the city of Teddy Pendergrass, uh, uh, many other, the OJs. And what prompted me to leave Philadelphia for Los Angeles was in 1979. And I was in a very, very violent and tumultuous relationship where, and this is probably one of my life's trauma, and it just got so bad and so toxic that I made a decision to leave Philadelphia. My mother had moved out there, and I had a sister out there. And so I made the choice to leave Philadelphia and move to Los Angeles in January of 1979. And I thought I had found heaven. I landed on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I just said, this was January and it was 80 degrees. And so coming from Philadelphia and the snow and the winter, and the wintertime in Philadelphia, we hibernate. But I could not believe standing there on Crenshaw Boulevard, um, near Santa Monica. And I looked in the distance, and all I could see was snow capped mountains. I'd never experienced anything like that before. And it was 80 degrees in January. And I said to myself, oh my God, Los Angeles, where have you been? And that's where it all started. I moved in with my mother briefly. I'd been a respiratory therapist, God, since 1975. So before I left Philadelphia, of course, I already had a job at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center as a respiratory therapist. But just it just was an enormous and fantastic experience in the beginning.
Mm. We're going to talk about that. So I'm going to share something else with you that I did not know that you were from Philly. So I am sitting right now in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is of course
Wow.
outside of
I
Philadelphia.
lived there.
Oh, you lived in
Yes,
Chester?
I
Yes, yes,
lived
yes.
in Chester. Early
Yes,
recovery.
yes. I was born and raised here. I left. I returned to take care of my parents. So it's interesting. Today, my brother is taking care of my mom. He's taking her to the doctor. I was like, I have a taping today, so can you take care of that? But yes, I moved back to take care of my parents. I spent the last year of my father's life with him. I took care of him right here in this house. And then now I'm here with my mom and I'm taking care of her and making sure she good. So yes, but I lived in Atlanta for many, many years. But yeah, came back 3 years ago. So I just wanted to share that we definitely share the connection of being from this
Absolutely.
area.
Absolutely.
Um, so let's talk a bit about. So you arrive in LA during a coming out of a very tumultuous and difficult relationship. What was finding community like in 1979?
Well, I felt like this was really a divine intervention. I didn't know anybody socially in Los Angeles other than my mother and my sister. And so one day I just decided to walk. Uh, I was living off with my mom off of Crenshaw Boulevard. So that was right near Adams Boulevard. So I just started walking up Adams Boulevard. I said, I just wanted to see the scenery. I wanted to get a sense of the streets and their names, that kind of a thing, because I left so abruptly and so quickly. And I had not visited Los Angeles that often before I actually moved here. So I was walking up Adams Boulevard and I got to Adams and Crenshaw Boulevard. And on the corner was this bar. And so I said to myself, this was early evening. I said, well, just go in the bar and see what's going on. I didn't know what kind of bar it was. I didn't know anything. Lo and behold, that bar was called the Intermission. So I walked in and I met two of the owners. One was Bobby Shagwire. The other one was Clarence Odoms. And so it wasn't until I kind of sat down and looked around that I noticed that it was a gay bar, a Black gay bar. And so Bobby Shagwire asked me, he says, have you ever bartended before? Because I was explaining to him that I just moved there. I didn't really know anybody. And he asked me if I could bartend. I said, I've never bartended before. I don't know anything about bartending. He said, would you like to learn? And I thought for a moment. And then I said, hell, why not? And so that started a social journey unlike anything I could have ever expected. I got to meet everybody in the Black gay community because they all came to the Intermission. And I was working day shift at Cedars-Sinai, but I did happy hour. So I got off at 3 o'clock and I was at the bar by 5 o'clock and worked from 5 until 9. And again, everybody who was anybody in the Black gay community came through the Intermission. And so that's how I started establishing community. And I became a damn good bartender in the process because the place would be packed during happy hour. And I just had to learn and had to, those well drinks and just, I just got to be very, very good. And it just was a great social outlet.
Wow. And I think it's really important that we talk about the fact that there wasn't that was the way to meet folks then, right? We didn't have we didn't have these devices. We didn't have even the internet to be able to, because when I came out, actually, my first group of folks that I met was through the internet, right? Because that was an easy place for me to meet folks, right? But we needed spaces that were for us and safe for us to go into in order to find that community. So I'm curious. So the intermission, um, talk to me a little bit about what the environment was like. Can you describe the club a little bit? What was the music given? What was the environment?
I never will forget when I landed there. And back then, they don't have this now, but we had the jukebox.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
we would play, and the records of the day was Michael Jackson, Beat It, was Aretha Franklin, Ladies Only, uh, and other kinds of George Benson. And so this was the music, and we danced in the club. And as a bartender, and the other thing too was, it was one of those bars where a fight would break out at any moment. And that was sort of like the normal thing. And so we just never skipped a beat. Bobby Shagwire, who not only was the owner's partner, but also kind of managed the bar and kind of managed those volatile kinds of situation. But it also allowed me opportunities to go to other places. So I was always invited to all of the parties, the Hollywood parties, always invited. And there was a camaraderie among the bartenders and among the people who worked at the intermission. And so a young lady, and she, as far as I know, was a heterosexual lady that was a main staple at the intermission. And she sort of, on days that we weren't working, we would go to places like the zoo. We would go to other kinds of outlets, just, us as bartenders. And so there was a camaraderie, there was a community among the bartenders at the intermission. And so subsequently, when I stopped working at the intermission, I was also then offered a bartending position at another club called Papa Bear's, which was a main staple in Los Angeles at that time, a little bit larger than the intermission. But nevertheless, that was also another avenue where there was many, many social connections. And the thing here is that I knew almost every Black gay person in LA because they all came through. And from there, I migrated to the Catch One and the Jewel Room and bartended for them. And so it just was, I guess I was kind of like a social butterfly. I guess that's what they called them. And some of that kind of went to my head because I was invited to all of the, the quaint parties and all of the other, kinds of enjoyable and, positive things. But it also drew me into some of the negative things as well.
Mm. Oh, yes, we are going to talk about that. And speaking of Jules, Catch One, it's so interesting that you mentioned Jules' room. After we end this session, there is a colleague of mine who spent a lot of time in Jules' room. We've talked about that. So you might actually know them. So we're actually we'll do that later because I'm really curious.
Yeah.
And if you don't know them, they're in Atlanta too. So we need to make that connection.
Okay.
Okay. So
and a friend of mine, there are a couple of people here in Atlanta where we work together at the Jewel Room. One gentleman's named Davenport. He worked with me at the Jewel Room. So there definitely is a connection there as well.
Wow, the importance of our spaces.
Let me just also say, and I have to illuminate this because this is just really sort of starchly etched in my memory. about the Jewel Room. It was just such a rich experience. It was such a fulfilling experience because on Sunday nights, particularly, we had talent show. And I tell you, it was so enjoyable. It was so enjoyable. We would have people who were up and coming, actually up and coming stars that would show their talent on Sundays. And, we would support them and encourage them. But it was just, and it was packed. It was always packed. But it just was so enjoyable. And it was a space for the Black LGBT community to come together as community. And not only that, when you talk about moving upstairs, because the Jewel Room was downstairs, but the Catch One was upstairs, and the Catch One was a place not just for LGBTQ plus. It was not unusual to walk in there and see, let's say, one of the Pointer Sisters. Walked in there one day and saw, I think, the lady from Sanford and Son. Was Esther? Was that her name?
Oh,
LaWanda Page.
LaWanda Page.
LaWanda Page. Saw her sitting up in there. So a lot of the Hollywood stars also came and supported the Jewel Room, including Madonna and these other stars. But it also attracted some pretty popular entertainment acts. I saw 2 Tons of Fun there. And it's a memory that is just so etched in my mind because the place was packed and they put on such a phenomenal performance. And so, yeah, it really drew a lot of not just support within the LGBT community, but other allies sort of migrated and supported Jewel's efforts. And I tell you, if you've not seen the documentary on the Catch One, you have to see that because many things I have forgotten about. Many of the people during that time that I interacted with, I can think of one Henry and some of those other people were shown in the documentary. But I didn't know the extent of the community empowerment, of the role that Jewel played, not only in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but also in the recovery community. So I say all of that to say, given the climate, given the HIV/AIDS epidemic that was raging during those years, there was such a tight sense of community during that time that oftentimes is underrated.
Mm. Let's actually talk about that a bit. And this brings in actually a conversation about Archbishop Carl Bean. So we at CMP talk about Archbishop Bean's work in our work. I had the chance to interview him in 2021 before he passed away, which I'm so honored that he said yes. He said, I don't normally say yes to things like this. And we talked for like 2 hours. And
I heard the interview.
Yes. So I'll never forget that. I wish I'd had the chance to meet him in person, but I'm grateful that we got a chance to share space. He's another one of those figures really that fought for the dignity of Black folks living with HIV in Los Angeles during that time. But you knew him. How did you meet him?
Well, of course, in early to mid 1980s, of course, the HIV epidemic was raging. And a lot of the funding that was coming down to white gay organizations, and that didn't necessarily transition into the Black community to the extent that was needed. Carl Bean was someone that I met, and I've never, ever met anyone like him since then or before that. And I can remember in 1984, and I guess I had just heard about this church that was starting up, that was supportive and affirming of LGBTQ plus. So I said, well, let me just check this out. And it was at the Ebony Showcase Theater in Los Angeles. I can't remember exactly where it was located, but I never will forget. I went there, and the message that I heard from him was absolutely transformative. Because let me just say, I was born and bred in Kojak, the Church of God in Christ slash Baptist Church. So the teachings around sexual orientation was very strict, very straight to the point. Uh, it was an abomination. It was that you would be the first one to bust hell wide open. And it was not unordinary to walk into a church and hear this choir that sent the church into a musical frenzy, and followed by a pastor who would preach such a dehumanizing and demeaning sermon around sexual orientation. The same people. And then after the sermon, where you've been humiliated, dehumanized, and the first thing that comes around, of course, is the collection plate. So my thought was, well, if I'm not accepted, if I'm so demonic, then so is my dollars. And so when I heard Carl give us a different way of thinking about sexual orientation and spirituality, it was just transformative, because we had always heard just one side of the coin. It was just that one way of looking at sexual orientation as very negative, very demonic. But this liberation theology that he was teaching, and not only was he teaching it to LGBTQ, he was in the face of many of the pastors and bishops there in Los Angeles, and they could not debunk what he was saying because it made so much sense. Because many of them had not even visited a lot of the scriptures and those purity laws and all those laws that they expect us to follow, but none of them ever follows them. And so it was so transformative that his message was a message of acceptance of your sexual orientation just as you are, that you are a flower that is planted and you can bloom right where you are planted. It was transformative. I never heard that. And that was a spark that was lit inside me, that there were other ways of thinking about spirituality and sexual orientation. Then I started reading other literature, because what I heard him say is that spiritual insight did not stop with the Bible writers. There are many people now who are putting out literature, who have insight that debunks a lot of the literal interpretation of scripture that we've been so used to being beat up with. And that was just a freedom that just started a journey for me of healing.
You have a couple of times during our conversation talked about your journey through recovery. And I want to talk about this time period. So there is this spiritual awakening that you are having. There is the HIV epidemic that is happening. You are also in this kind of particular point in your life, right? Talk to us a bit about, because you mentioned that everything was good in Los Angeles at first, I think is the
Yes.
way you phrased it. Let's talk a little bit about when that changed and kind of what led you out of that darker period.
And so as I was working at the Intermission, this young man, I never will forget, it's just etched in my memory. They had, pay telephones back then. So this young man was on this pay telephone, but he kept coming to the bar and he kept asking me for my telephone number. And, I was a little suspect. I'm like, why do you want my telephone number? And he says, I'd like to see you. And he actually said, I want to go home with you. And I said, I'm not doing that. If you want to go out for tea, we can do that. Long story short, um, I was in a long-term relationship in in Los Angeles during that time. This was around 1980, 1981. And while it wasn't as violent as the previous relationship, it was still very tumultuous. Because, of course, it's difficult if I'm working in a bar situation and I'm in a relationship, there's going to be just a lot of jealousy. And I say that to say, ultimately, I did stop for a while working in the bar at his request and engaged in this long term relationship. And at the end of that relationship, there was something that happened to me. There was a trauma that happened at the end of the relationship that I had not expected, that I had not ever been used to. And I was actually having a nervous breakdown, you know, because of the breakup of this relationship. And essentially, what it was is the breakup was him, moving out and moving in with somebody else that, I thought was a friend, but lo and behold, it was something different. So it was very hard for me to deal with that.